and you argue that side, it doesn't matter what the other person's point of view is. You argue your point, whatever makes it strong.
Right.
And then the people decide from the debate of what's right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's that.
And it just really hit home to me because I'm wanting, I guess, somebody to, if they're going to debate, to process it for me. And that's not the way it works.
No, it can't be because no one can hold a belief for you.
Yeah.
You have to hold that for yourself. So there are three possibilities for every proposition. The other person's right and you're wrong. You're right and the other person's wrong, or you're both wrong. Those are the only three options you have in a discussion. And how we come to the conclusion of who is considered right is the best explanation given the evidence at that time. So it's called abductive reasoning. So here's all the information we have on a subject. We've exhausted it. Which explanation makes the most sense given all the evidence? And then you lean, this person's probably more right. That's kind of where that's where you're going to have to leave it. For most things political.
I was just thinking too, okay, back in the 50s, it was Mccarthyism.
Yeah.
Now, I don't necessarily agree that was a good period. But, it was to stop socialism.
Yeah.
But there was a lot of wrongs done in that too.
A lot of wrong.
And now it's almost like we're at the other end of it, with the left, is gaining their power or whatever and forcing it onto the people. And it's like, that's just that. So how do we swing it back to the middle?
Well, if you want my opinion
Sure.
on this, and I'll give you my opinion. My opinion is, in a free society, everyone has to have a right to speak their mind. You can't relegate speech. You cannot compel speech. So we need to go back to the original political aim that all men are created equal, go back to the Bill of Rights, freedom of speech, freedom of press, freedom of religion. You have the right to defend yourself. You have the right to your own thoughts, and go there and say, we're going to get rid of all of this. You offended me. You did this language. You have to call me this. You can't say this, and go, all right, it's going to be a fair fight. You bring your best, I'll bring my best, and whichever best is the best will ever vest to the top. That's the only way for a free society to work, because if I'm constantly looking over my shoulder and going, am I saying the right thing? Am I doing the right thing? Well, that's not a free society. What I think it was Dostoevsky said that the reason why tyranny doesn't do as well as a free society, so dictatorships, why communism failed, why the USSR failed and America prospered, was because if you have a dictatorship, you have to spend half your resources keeping your people in line, making sure they're following the rules. In a free society, people are guided by their own, for the most part, their own ethics and their own morality, right? America's built on the morality, transcendent morality. We are looking to a higher morality than ourselves, right? So I can trust you if you're looking to a higher morality not to lie and cheat or steal, because we're playing a higher game. Well, dictatorships is, no, you're playing my game and I can change the rules anytime I want. And so everybody's paranoid. And then they have to have special police, and they have to have special tribunals, and they spend so much of their time building fences and walls and gates and to hold people in to this one thing they want them to do. And that's just not human nature, And so I think you need to go back and say, all right, let's open this thing back up. Because here's the thing, no one can define what hate speech is. No one can define it. So how can you prosecute somebody for hate speech if you can't define what it is? Because it's constantly changing. How can you compel speech when definitions are being torn apart every day, and I can change the definition tomorrow of what I am, but I'm going to compel you to speak that way? It's to the point where society is starting to fray at the edges, because we're no longer bound by a common thread of, we know what to do, what's right. We know what's right to do, and what's right is You have the ability to speak your mind. I have the ability to speak my mind. We're Americans. Say whatever we want to each other. It may not be kind or decent, but even if you call me something horrible, I will defend your right to say it, because I know that if that right is taken away, we are headed down a path that is going to be very, very destructive. So that's my feeling, is open it up and because the good things will rise to the top and the bad things will fall away. So think about this. People bring up white supremacy and KKK and all this. For 100 years, people had the ability to be a part of the KKK. Was it a major national organization? People had the free choice. Anybody could have joined, but they didn't. Why? Because it's an evil organization. It's bad, and so people said, I don't want a part of that. Right? So if you give people the choice, they will choose the right more than they'll choose the bad in a free society, because playing the game that helps both of us means we'll flourish, right? And we both want to flourish. And so Peterson brought up this point, and then we'll get into the book. But Peterson brought up this really cool point. He said eBay shouldn't have existed, right? So when eBay first started, he said that you're going to sell the junk in your garage, and I'm going to pay you money. What should have happened was, you don't sell me anything, you're going to sell me trash, and I don't send you real money. And it should have fallen apart. What happened was 99.9% of the transactions were good. And so eBay flourished because people wanted to play the same game. You don't want to sell me trash, and I don't want to give you bad money. Because it's a game we both flourish at. In a free society, we know if we both flourish, that the entire society will flourish. Right? And so I think that's where we need to get back to the initial aims. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm going to throw a wrench into the situation too, because here's what we face right now, which is that it's much less about what the government is actually doing to curtail free speech as much as it is what society itself is doing to curtail free speech with cancel culture and things like that. And so what we face is in my view, much more difficult, because we're facing unspoken, unwritten, unaccountable laws created by nebulous thoughts in a completely unaccountable environment, like the one I'm speaking to you right now.
Right.
It's the classic paradox of how do you basically rein in a cloud. And so what we're facing is I don't know. Like I look at Myanmar and what's happening over there right now, and I can see that problem with this military dictator basically taking over. And I'm saying to myself, that's a solvable problem.
Right.
And then I look at what we've got here, and I'm like, this one's way harder. There's certainly a way to solve it, but it's not so easy because it's in our cultural DNA now, and we've become infected with this ideology that's very difficult to rid ourselves of. It's really tough to get that out.
Yeah, cancel culture is this one thing that it is a nebulous, but most people, I would say the majority of the people, it's a small minority who are canceling. And most people just don't want anything to do with it. They're like, it's not me. But when it comes to your front door, you're like, oh, I don't know. I know dozens of people who have been canceled on Facebook in the last few months. Dozens of friends who have been canceled or shadow banned for simply sharing an opinion. Now, the government does help in this instance because Section 230 allows them to censor as a private entity. These big tech companies get a censor based on Section 230. Whereas if they were a public utility, they wouldn't be able to censor, or if they were a publisher, then they would be liable for suit. So there's a lot of, accountability is not there.
Yeah. And there's also a lot of problems with that because the law actually isn't official yet. That's the other problem there, is that it's Section 230 isn't completely solid ground.
It's gray.
It's very gray. It's
Yeah.
very debatable. So what you have now is not actually
Yeah.
Which is to say that I can do what I want with your copyrighted content, and you probably can prosecute me for it, and I probably can still win.
Yeah.
But I still lose because I've just paid $200,000 in legal fees.
Yep.
So it's like, it's one of those situations that's like, it's still gray. It's still so gray that there's no up and down. There's no left and right on it. It's just.
I think though, I think the problem is that the younger generation has been taught that my truth equals the truth.
Yeah, postmodernism.
Yeah, and the thing is, it only, like you say, it only ever goes one way, right? So one group of people, they get to compel how I speak about them, but I don't get to compel how they speak about me. And so if I don't say what they want me to say, then suddenly they call me a name I don't want to be called, identify me in a way I don't want to be identified. But if I push back, then I'm shamed and then I'm canceled. And you go, well, wait, I thought you wanted I thought you wanted equity.
Yeah.
No, it's an animal farm. All animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others. And because that is in there and people know that they can get away with it by simply pushing out my truth, there's no accountability on that side of it either. And you go, wait a second, I don't want to play this game. I mentioned this, we talked last week, David and Solzhenitsyn, sort of about this. There's a game being played right now, and the game is you refer to me how I want you to refer to me, and if you don't, then your speech is violence towards me. Well, if you say, I don't want to play, your silence is violence towards me. So there's not an option not to play. The only way you can play is if you do exactly what I say, and that will change tomorrow. Or it could change in the next 5 minutes, but you have to keep up with me, or I will ding you. It's like, who wants to play that game? I lose by existing. That's not a game. That's not a game for flourishing. That's a game that's pretty much perpetuating chaos. And I go, wait, I don't want to play a game like that. That will not create flourishing at all. And Solzhenitsyn actually gets into that in chapters 3 and 4. He talks about progressive fads and how you defeat those things. And so he actually gets into his basic premise of how to stop all of this, at least for yourself. And this book's gut wrenching. I mean, in a good way. It's just like a. I think I posted this today, but
because it had me thinking about how I am, what's different about me, what way other people, why are we having these debates and stuff? It really bugs me.
And so one of the things that C.S. Lewis actually talked about in Screwtape Letters, and I've always thought about this. He nailed the post-truth movement when Screwtape says, don't get them talking about science, don't get them talking about reason and facts, get them on emotion and opinion, because that can't be refuted.
He's about to bring up equitable math.
Equitable math.
There's multiple answers to the same equation.
Math is racist because there's only one answer. And you go, where do you see society going where equitable math is? Well, they got close to the right answer, so we're going to, like...
Did you do that at the foundation?
Did you do that with the foundation of the building? Did you? I kind of got the math right. I'm building a skyscraper, and I'm using equitable math. Like, well, I will not visit that skyscraper. I will be away for, like... This whole city was built on equitable math. You can have it. You will not move there. So... Yeah, it's a real Tower of Babel, but it's sort of self-inflicted. It's...
Yeah, we're doing it to ourselves.
Yeah. So that hideous... What I kind of love a little bit is that hideous strength in the last part when they start having the meeting and Wither stands up to speak and those guys and they're starting to talk and they're speaking gibberish and no one can understand each other. That's where postmodernism is going, is they won't be able to understand each other because it'll be, no, it's what I'm saying, but the person will be like, it's gibberish. What you're saying is wrong.
And they change the dictionary meaning.
change the dictionary meanings back and forth like that. Society cannot stand where the goalposts are like a flag waving in the breeze. It's not going to be solid. So I think our position needs to be, we need to grab onto what we can that's secure and solid and just stand and just go, no, I'm going to stay right here. And I'm going to anchor myself to this because what's coming looks like it'd be really, really bad. So let's jump in here because he deals with a lot of this in this. So I don't know if you have the book there, David, or.
Yeah, I got it.
Well, so let me ask you: Did you read the book yet?
Yeah, I read the whole thing.
All right. What? Since we haven't talked to you, what are your initial thoughts?
I think he's got a lot of good stuff here, and like especially, I mean, he drew me in very well at the beginning in the art section, as I kind of call it. And I really like that he kind of comes back to that in the end. He kind of circles back around to that in the end with the whole like idea that what we can do, and it's kind of like a Lewisian idea of getting past the watchful dragons in a lot of ways. That we can get to truth we can get to people using truth through art in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
One of the things that I found that was challenging about the book to me was trying to apply some of the principles to a society that is kind of post-truth now. And that was challenging to me in a lot of ways because, what we kind of deal with situations nowadays where we can say whatever we like, but at the end of the day, something did happen, and we have to figure out what it is. But then when you have a bunch of people screaming at each other through either art or through something that is representative of art but totally isn't, we end up like just screaming at each other what we think are facts and then aren't facts, and like one side's probably right, one side's probably wrong, but then sometimes both sides are completely wrong, and like neither of them really know what the facts are, and so it's this really complicated situation nowadays. I feel like with the advent of, I think we're getting really complicated too when we start throwing in things like deep fakes and the way we can edit and create someone's voice and stuff like this. I mean, it's very difficult for me to look at this and go and apply it to certain situations that are on the fringe of what's coming, which is the ability to manipulate reality so effectively that no one can tell you what actually is or isn't real. And that's scary to me because a lot of the stuff that he has in here, while foundationally amazing, falls apart as soon as we interject those situations where we can't tell if the thing that we are looking at is actually a real thing. When the fabric of what our eyes, perceive can be complete unreality. It's just, that's what scares me the most. But I think that we can probably work to something using these principles in those kinds of situations.
See, I think that that's a really good overview of the book and your opinion on that. I think there's a lot of merit in that. Well, I think what he answered in the last section about the three trees, and truth can be manipulated, the good can be manipulated because they're formulaic. Like, video evidence can be manipulated because it's formulaic. Our eyes see this thing. Beauty can't be. It's whimsical. It's not formulaic. And whether it's like Corey ten Boom in Ravensbrook and everybody hearing the lark sing beautifully as they're standing naked for 6 hours, you go, you can't stop that kind of truth. That will always come through. No matter the deep fakes and all that there is a truth that will, through the unconscious and through the archetypes and through things beyond what can be manipulated. I think it will Yeah, and also this book is earned wisdom too. This guy lived through some of the deepest, darkest.
His bio is nasty.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. So let's start with chapter 3, page 8. Only 30 more pages to go. I have climbed my way up to this lectern from which the noble lecture is read, a lectern not granted to every writer and once only in a lifetime, not just up 3 or 4 specially erected steps, but hundreds or even thousands of them, unyielding, steep, frozen, out of the dark and the cold, where I was fated to survive, and where others, who possessed perhaps greater talent and were stronger than I, perished. I met only a few among them in the Gulag archipelago, scattered over the widespread multitude of islands, and beneath the millstone of police surveillance and mistrust, I did not speak face to face with all of those who were there either. Of some of them I only heard secondhand, and about others I only guessed. Those who fell into that abyss, who had made the name in literature, are at least known to us, but how many were unknown and never published? What I find with people who have earned wisdom is they understand the cost at which they gained that wisdom, and very few are arrogant about it that have gained true wisdom, because you know at what cost it came at. When you have wisdom that you didn't earn, I think you're more flippant and more careless with it, and try to seize upon it monetarily. And I have this talent and gift. Let me monetize it, and let me stretch out, and I can be arrogant and bold because I have this thing. And Solzhenitsyn, like, do you know what it cost me to be able to write these words? This sentence structure, the foundation of this is so terrifying and so terrible that. Why would I be flippant about it? Even the Apostle Paul says, I won't even glory in the things that I've gone through. Like, I think of...
Is it almost like when you read about something and like you learn all that and it looks good on paper, but until you actually go through the application process, people boast about that all the time, but this is the inverse of that.
Yes.
So, he's actually gone through the application process.
Same with Frankel.
Yeah.
Yep.
The same with Frankel. And so when you read those guys, each letter on the page is weighted down with experience that is just almost unconscionable for us to even consider. And so when I think it just hits me in the heart and just goes, man, this guy who has been noted to be the man who took down Stalin with a pen, and yet he says there were writers that were in the gulags that were way more talented and deserve this honor more than I do. That's knowing your place, in a sense. That's,
I always think that too.
I think he almost gives us a window there into this, into maybe like, it's just kind of occurred to me is this question of how do we know what to trust in this area of such deep deception. In some ways, his very existence and the way he presents that humility gives us maybe a window into how to approach individuals who are telling us one thing or another. Because I think we can see false humility. I think most of us can see it, and we can also see, like you were saying, Wes, with this guy, like we can see through his every word that he has experiential knowledge about the things that he's writing, and yet he does not hold himself in high regard. And when I see those kinds of people, where either artists or even sometimes in the government, it seems like not of late, but those kinds of people, the kinds of people that I'm like, man, okay, yeah, I'll listen because you've been there, and not just in terms of like physically, but like emotionally, that kind of not that kind of the epistemology they have is earned.
yes,
yes,
yeah.
I forgot what I was going to say. I think just getting back, it's like we're all in this day and age, in the age of reason, we're all sponges absorbing all this information, but until we actually go and have it tested, it's kind of useless. It's like, what can your knowledge get you if you don't actually have it tried?
So there's an archetypal story in King David putting on Saul's armor, and he was not able to use it, even though it was beneficial, even though it had been tested and tried, not by him. He had to go with a sling and a few stones to defeat the giant, because that's what he had experience with. That's what he had mastered, and so that's what he had to take into the fight. And so I think this is good enough for each of us to go, all right, what...
For that particular time.
Yes. As you gain more experience and more knowledge, then your armor changes, and your abilities and your words and your wisdom changes. Hopefully, if you have the same wisdom in your 20s you have in your 50s, I feel sorry. That's not good. That's not good.
Still 20.
Let's move on here. And so very few, almost no one, managed to survive and return. A whole national literature remains behind, buried not only without coffins and graves, but even without underwear, naked except for an identification tag on the toe. Russian literature never ceased for one moment. Yet from outside it seemed a desert. Where a thick forest might have grown, there remained, after all the timbering, only 2 or 3 which had missed being cut down. And today, how am I, accompanied as I am by the spirits of those who perished, my head bowed as I let pass before me up to this lectern others who were earlier worthy of it? How am I here today, supposedly to divine and express that which they would have wished to say? Gosh.
Yeah. I think we have a different translation, because mine's like it's like you're reading the NIV and I'm reading King James. It's like,
You're not alone.
There's many versions. This one is the Thomas P. Whitney.
That's awesome.
okay.
I of all of them that I've read, I think this is one of the better translations.
It's interesting. Mine says the spirits, the shadows of the fallen, and yours says the spirits of the fallen. And that's interesting to me, because they're very, very different in my mind. And like, I'm kind of like, which one did he actually mean? I kind of want to get into the Russian out of it. But at any rate, we should get back to it.
Yeah. Well, I would say if we look to Lewis in the Great Divorce, we are all man-shaped stains, and so shadows may be the right, maybe what I would consider maybe more right, or the spirit. Maybe that's what they mean when they're using the word spirit here is the ethereal part of man. You know, the
shades.
The ether,
Shade.
the shade. Yeah, the ether for the form, the platonic form of the person remains, but the
Old Testament.
yeah. I apologize if it's going to be read a little different, but this dude, yeah, it is. We had like 3 different versions here, last week. This duty has long weighed upon me, and I have understood it. In the words of Vladimir Solovev, in chains too, we must close the circle which the gods have drawn for us. In chains too, we must close the circle which the gods have drawn for us. In exhausting camp marches and rows of lantern lightings, the columns of prisoners in the darkness of sub-zero nights, more than once we felt in our throats that we would have liked to have shouted out to the whole world, if only the world could have heard some spokesman from among us. And at that time it seemed very, very clear that all our lucky envoy had to do was to raise an outcry, and instantly the whole world would respond. Our entire outlook in terms of both material objects and emotional actions and reactions was precisely defined. And we sensed no lack of balance in the indivisible world. Those thoughts had not come from the books and had not been taken over for the sake of harmony and good order. They had been formulated in prison cells and around the timber camps bonfires in conversations with people long since dead, who had emerged tried and true from that life, who had matured in that existence. His poetry and prose is just absolutely stunning.
Yeah. And like he says, basically says, we got this from general revelation, but like in a way that just pierces the heart.
Yeah.
It's really, really remarkable.
When the external pressure lessened, our outlook and my own outlook broadened, and gradually, if only through a peephole, the whole world could be seen and discerned. Meditations in a tool shed, anyone? Looking at the beam? And surprisingly for us, that whole world turned out to be something quite different from what we expected it to be, looking along the beam. It did not live by what we had expected. It was proceeded to a destination we had not anticipated. And when it came to the swampy bog, it exclaimed, "What a divine and lovely lawn." When it had encountered stocks made of concrete that were going to be placed around the necks of its prisoners, it exclaimed, "What a lovely necklace." And where unquenchable tears poured forth for some, others danced to lighthearted music. Ben, we'll take a crack at that. Let me read on here, and we'll circle back to this. So, how has this come about? Whence has this abyss arisen? We are all unfeeling, or was the world unfeeling, or was it due to the difference in languages? How does it happen that people are unable to understand each other's plain speech? There we go. We talked about that earlier, didn't we? How does it happen that people are unable to understand each other's plain speech? Words resound and flow like water, without taste or color or odor, without a trace. To the extent that I have come to understand this, the content, meaning, and tone of my possible speech here have changed over and over again with the years. The speech that I am delivering today, it is by now very little like the speech which I first conceived in the sub-zero cold of the camp nights. It was not what we expected, what we'd anticipated. When it came to the swampy bog, it exclaimed, "What a divine and lovely lawn." And when it encountered stocks made of concrete that were going to be placed around the necks of prisoners, it exclaimed, "What a lovely necklace." And where unquenchable tears poured forth, and for some, others danced to lighthearted music. What comes to mind here is...
He should be in here too.
What comes to mind here is Betsy Tin Boom watching a Jewish prisoner being beaten and looking at Corey and saying, "That poor woman." And Corey said, "I know, the poor prisoner getting beaten." She said, No. The woman guard who's beating her. To have that much hate in your heart and that much pain that you would be willing to inflict that kind of suffering on someone else, it must be miserable to be her. And I see that looking at this and going, there's a bog out there. You're and you being able, through a change of whatever this is going on, beauty speaking to you and going, "What a lovely lawn," when it's this nasty bog, or when there's a concrete, stock going around your neck. What a lovely necklace. The unquenchable tears can sound like delightful music. I mean, it's...
Yeah, it's kind of like the opposite of the last battle when they're in the stable. When the dwarves are saying, "Oh, this is, get that thing out of my face," and put poop in my mouth, that kind of thing.
Right.
Like, it's the opposite.
I was thinking of Frankel saying that the people who went to the incinerators, to the crematorium, with the words of the word of Adonai on their lips as they went in joyfully going into the crematorium. And that caused Frankel to question things. And the same thing for Solzhenitsyn. He met Christians who were happy and joyful in the gulags. And he's like, he was an atheist when he went in. How do you find joy here? And they were like, it was because of Christ. And Christ can take the bog and turn it into, what a lovely lawn. You know? That is, it's just, I don't know, it's so heavy to wrestle with, because when we went to the concentration camps, I know so many people were like, I just wept and cried when I went there, and I felt all this pain. I couldn't get myself into that position, because when I went there was green grass everywhere. There were trees, there were flowers. It was beautiful. It didn't look like there had been the great atrocities that had happened. So I came away very hopeful from that. And so it's really hard to put yourself into this earned position and know exactly how one comes about this change. It's just so powerful. That does it with 3. Let's move on to 4. Go ahead.
To make the change, at one of the concentration camps, they beautified it in some way. They're doing some wrestling with.
He's just saying that
all that history being that happened there, and
nature just took over. They just let nature go, and so the grass grew and the trees grew, and flowers came up, and the vines took over the old buildings and weaved its way through, and there were flowers in the vines cracking through all the Nazi concrete, and it was this beautiful ruin of some great atrocity. And there were fields of just wildflowers out there that were it was fantastic.
Was there any monuments?
Oh yeah, there were tons of monuments to what had happened, and so they'd been preserved, but nature had just taken its course. If you let nature take its course, it will beautify the place. You had to strip nature of itself in order to commit atrocities. But if you just let nature, if you let beauty speak, it always speaks truth. It's something along those lines. I'm getting a little abstract there, but
I'm sorry, because I was just trying to wrestle with that, and with today's situation, like the Lexington courthouse and all that, where they, back in the Civil War, they sold slaves and stuff like that. Of course, the people wanted, or a group wanted to remove the Confederate soldiers out of the park. They just wanted to cancel it.
Mm-hmm.
But if you do that, then you're not remembering history. I would have been okay with moving it somewhere.
Which is what they ended up doing.
Yeah, but nobody was where.
Cemetery.
Was it?
Lexington
Yeah.
Cemetery.
I never did hear where.
Yeah.
But anyway, so if we'd have just left it alone, time would have taken care of itself and healed that particular wound.
Yeah.
Without us even doing anything. Right?
I think, and I think you can, I think we do have a responsibility to, I think back to Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life. He says, clean your room. Clean your room. He said, if you can clean your room, you can handle a simple problem. And then if you can handle a simple problem, why don't you make it more complex and beautify your room? And then beautify the next room in your house. And then beautify your house, because by you beautifying your house and creating some kind of value to your home and making other people will see the beautification of your home, and they may say, I'd like to beautify my house as well. Because we are we know that we need nature and beauty in our lives, and if you are devoid of nature and beauty, you become soulless and you become deadened inside unless you have the ability to partake in nature and in that kind of beauty. So every big city always have parks. You need greens, we need trees, we need flowers, we need to see that. Psychologically, like there's something in us that needs that connection. So
we're still going to need human involvement.
Well, yeah, we're the gardeners, right? I think that's, we were to subdue the earth. Now, we since we have free will, we can, as Lewis says, we can become people who bring torment or people who help bring eternal goodness. We can help each other to either of those goals. So it's how do we choose? Do we choose to uplift and beautify, or do we choose to tear down? And that's the choice we have. And I think that's what we're going to get to in a minute, that he's given a principle to where I stand on this principle. And what's funny is I've heard it from several people, including Jesus himself. And it's one of those truths that ever rises to the top that I go, okay, I've seen this truth pop up, for thousands of years. I'm going to hold on to it because it seems to be, societies that grab onto this truth, yeah, they really they really flourish. Societies that reject this truth, they don't flourish as well. So, does someone else want to read? Do you want to read?
Sure.
My wife's she's a better reader than I am.
Am I starting just here?
Yep, chapter 4.
From time immemorial, the human being has been structured in such a way that his world outlook, at least when not induced by hypnosis, his motivations and scale of values, his actions and intentions are determined by his own personal and group life experience. As the Russian proverb says, believe not your own brother, believe instead your own blind eye. This is the healthiest foundation of understanding one's surroundings and for one's behavior in them. And through all those long ages when our world was so mysteriously remotely separated, before it was crisscrossed by unifying lines of communication, before it was transformed into a united and tremulously beating clump, people were guided unerringly by their own life experience in their own limited locality, in their own community, in their own society, and in the end, in their own national territory. In those times, it was possible for individual human eyes to perceive and accept a certain common scale of values, what was recognized as being average, as being improbable or unlikely, as being cruel, harsh, what was regarded as being beyond all bounds of evil doing, what was honorable, what was deceit. And even though widely scattered peoples lived in different ways, even though their scale of social values might be astonishingly at variance, just as in fact their systems of weights and measures were at variance, these differences surprised only infrequent travelers and were collected for publication in various journals as curiosities which held no danger for a still ununited humanity.
Oh, call him back. Remember, want to take a crack at that? Hello.
Don't know what happened there.
We had a poor connection here. So we want to take a crack at what he's getting at here. I'll give you my take to get the ball rolling. He seems to be saying that from the beginning of time, we've created microcosms and communities, and inside these communities, we've agreed to a certain set of values. And these set of values either help us flourish or they create in us a suffering. So we either flourish or we suffer based on these agreed upon things. And morality, yes. Now, C.S. Lewis posits that every great religious tradition that promotes human flourishing all believe that morality is objective. That's what the abolition of man, that's one of his main points in abolition of man, is every philosophy that creates human flourishing all believe that morality is objective. Now, they don't all agree where that objectivity is anchored to. That's the difference. So all religions, Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism, Christianity, Taoism, they all believe that there is a certain way to act and a certain way not to act. There is a right and wrong. There is objective morality. Now, what is that morality anchored to? That's the different question. And Lewis does not answer that in Abolition of Man. He answers that in Mere Christianity. And for Lewis, he says it makes the most sense that we anchor that to the ontological truth of the Judeo-Christian God, Jesus Christ. That's the best place to anchor morality in, is that transcendent God.
The part where he's talking about the crossing of communication, that
Mm-hmm.
reminds me, I think it was Peterson. He was talking about how old, it may not be Peterson, but it was talking about, I think he was talking about America, how all these different cultures and groups of people all come together and have to wrestle out their worldviews
Yes.
together.
Yes.
All different.
So this is what makes America unique. Is now this is completely my opinion on this, but I thought it was rather humorous when the European Union, they were going to form, and even my Scandinavian friends, they were like, we will show you Americans how to do immigration. We will show you Americans how to do multicultural unity. We're going to show you guys how to do it. Well, the EU is pretty much collapsed right now. And they found it was much, much harder to be pluralistic in a society where you have different religions and different ethnicities and different cultures and subcultures to unite. It's extremely difficult. And America's not done a terrible job. They've made massive mistakes. But to be able to stay unified on certain issues has been extremely... They've beaten the odds on that, and so I think that is interesting. I want to get to David. You mentioned something earlier. I want to get this: believe not your own brother, believe instead your own blind eye. You were talking about deep fakes and things like that.
Yeah.
Deep fakes.
And I'm reading that and I'm going, what this says to me, and I don't know what Solzhenitsyn's really getting, but what it says to me is, my blind eye would be my intuition. The blind eye would be the unconscious part of me that actually is able to discern truth better than I am consciously able to discern truth. I'm wondering if that's what the Russians are getting at there. That my
that's interesting. There's another translation thing here where I think yours might be better. Mine says crooked.
Says what?
Crooked?
Your own crooked eye.
Crooked.
See, I feel like everyone likes this version the best, the one Wes has.
Okay.
Blind eye. Yeah, blind eye to me sounds more like intuition. But like crooked eye, I don't even know what to make of that. Like, is that like
It sounds like evil
believing
eye.
your own dead spirit?
Yeah, the beam in your own eye and the speck in your brother's eye.
Yeah, like what exactly is that supposed to mean? Like this is one of those situations where I wish I could get to the original Russian again, because that line threw me at first when I first read it. I was like, I don't know where he's going with this.
Right.
And yeah, I'd love to see what the original Russian had to say about that, but because it does make a tremendous amount of difference to me which one it is.
This one does, yes. I think this, because I wouldn't believe my own crooked eye unless what there is another saying that Lewis says this: you don't have to learn truth as much as you have to be reminded of it, and people are more willing to believe something that they can think of in their own minds rather than being told. If they can come up with the truth, if they can come up with the answer on their own, they're more likely to accept it and believe it and retain it than if you just tell them the answer, you know? Maybe it's saying you don't believe this person necessarily because they're who they are, but believe your own self and your own limit. It gets really clouded there. I like my original interpretation about the unconscious.
Go
So.
with your gut.
Yeah, your intuition is greater than your sight.
Yeah. I mean, because he goes on in the next paragraph to say mankind has become, in my translation, mankind has become one, not but steadfastly one, as communities or even nations used to be, not united through the mutual years of experience, neither through possession of a single eye, affectionately called a crooked eye, nor yet through a common native language, but surpassing all barriers through international broadcasting and print. And to me, that's where things get really weird in my translation, because then he almost seems to be bashing the phrase.
Right. Let's see.
What does yours say for the second paragraph?
But then in our most recent decades, humanity has imperceptibly and suddenly become united, hopefully united and dangerously united, so that a concussion or an infection in one part almost instantly transmits to the other parts, which sometimes have no immunity at all against it. Wow. I love that. Humanity has become united, but not as a community or even a nation used to be united in the state of stability, not as a result of gradual life experiences, not through a sight of one's own eye, in which the proverb was jocularly called blind, not even through one's own native or comprehensible language, but instead, in spite of across all obstacles and barriers, but the international radio and press. Down upon us rolls a tidal wave of events. In one brief moment, half the world learns of their appearance, but the standard for measuring these events, for evaluating them in accordance with the laws of parts of the world, are unknown to us. It is not and cannot be carried by the ether or in newspaper columns. These standards have been established, except for too long and in too special a way, in the isolated lives of separate countries and societies. They cannot be communicated instantaneously, and in different regions and different particular, hard-won scales of values are applied, and judgment is delivered uncompromisingly, boldly, and solely on the basis of one's own particular scale of values, without regard for the scales of others. So I think what he's talking about. So I think I can pull this all together. He seems to be saying that the brother would be the media or the press, that now we're all interconnected. So when something happens, every part of the world is infected with what happened, whether they have the scales or the values to judge the thing. It is hoist and thrust upon them, and they have to make a judgment on it, because now they're experiencing it. But it may not even be for them or even be about them, but they're forced now to make this judgment, because we're all connected instantaneously. Something goes up on Twitter, it's all over the world, and you have to make a declaration on it. So that's your brother's eye, or that's your brother. Your own blind eye is the community in which you know, and you have a scale of justice, and you have these judgments that are around in your community that have been tried and tested, and you need to hold to those, because you know those, the value of those, you know those are true, because they've held for millennia, or they've held for generations, and you don't need to accept the value weights of your international brothers, because they may not. It's like globalism versus localism, He's saying, globalism, he's kind of speaking to globalism actually failing, and the local being more sustainable in your own, like individually. Localism is almost like not even nationalism, but even like nation statehood actually is more sustainable than globalism because of the infection rate.
Yeah, he says later the divergent scales of values scream discordance. They dazzle us and they daze us, and in order that it might not be painful, we steer clear of all other values as though from insanity, as though from illusion, and we confidently judge the whole world according to our own home values, which is why we take for the greater more painful and less bearable disaster, not that which is in fact greater, more painful and less bearable, but that which lies closest to us.
Yeah, and also maybe our maybe our value systems locally, some of those more subjective things shouldn't be applied globally to someone else's situation, and we're with Twitter, we're getting ready to go, bam, I'm going to give you my thing on top of here. There's an interesting analogy. We were in Provence, France, and we were at a Young Living farm and a lavender farm. They have these great lavender fields. And what was his son's name? Nicolas. And his dad is
Jean-Noel.
Jean-Noel. I love that. Jean-Noel. Jean-Noel. And they told us that they don't do clone lavender. What clone lavender is you take the best lavender that you have, the best bush, and you break off pieces of it and you replant it. And then every lavender plant you have is the same genus or the same strain. They're clones.
They do colonial.
So, yeah. And so now he says we do population, which means that each plant is its own individual and it grows differently. He goes, here's what happens when you clone the plant. If there's a blight or a bug or a bacteria that gets on it, it will wipe out the entire crop. But in population, and a bug or a bacteria gets on there, it will only wipe out this certain strain of lavender and the rest of the lavender will flourish. And I was like, wow, that is a great analogy for individualism over collectivism, And so I think that's what he's getting at here. That would be my
translation, the way it explains it, that's what I get, is he's saying that these scales, these values we have, cannot be, these scales and values have been settled into place and have been assimilated for too long a time and in too unique a fashion in the particular lives of specific countries and societies. They cannot be transmitted on the wing. It takes time for those values to develop and such.
Yes.
And we're flashing this news around the world in seconds.
Yeah.
But the values behind the decisions that led to these events have taken generations to evolve.
Yes.
And what evolved here is so totally different from what evolved there.
Yeah.
Yet we all get the same news, and we're interpreting it in totally different ways because of the values that we've grown up with.
This is why democracy or constitutional republics have failed in some of the regions. We're talking about McCarthyism, and we tried to rid the world of communism back in the day. And we would go help some of the people set up a democracy in Iraq, Iran, Kuwait, or all these. And they pretty much always failed. And the reason why is because the people didn't know what it was. They didn't know to want it. They didn't want it. They didn't know how it worked, and they didn't value it because it didn't grow. It wasn't cultivated. The Declaration. Yes, it wasn't organic. The Constitution and the Declaration came out of thousands of years of thought and poured into that, and it came out of a need to have something like this, and it was born out, and it was like, no, this is the thing this is the aim that we want. But if someone else doesn't want that aim or they don't even know they want that aim, if you hand them, it's like if somebody forgives you for something you didn't do. Why would I accept your forgiveness? Like, well, I forgive you for that, but I didn't do anything. I don't value that forgiveness. I don't value that, that thing. And so, yeah.
It's interesting because we can apply this, I think, now even to this, like I was saying, the Myanmar situation from earlier, where you have essentially a takeover in a country where 80% of the population reportedly has voted for a democratic government, for a leader who is now put in jail by the opposition because they are saying that there was widespread voter fraud. And so there's this complete takeover, and you have on the one hand a leader who's a military leader who's taken over the government and who has yet to provide any tangible proofs to support the claims. And on the other hand, you have a leader who is was at one time a really renowned international star because she did a lot of this amazing stuff to promote democracy in Burma, and then she fell out of favor because of this Rohingya genocide thing that she said she kind of claimed didn't happen, and so you have these competing cultural issues, and certain countries like the U.S. and the U.K. are kind of reluctant to back her because of her denial of the genocide thing, but at the same time they don't want to back a military coup. So it's this it's kind of a pretty good example of the kind of situation we're seeing, where the culture that Myanmar has, basically been steeped in for thousands of years is completely antithetical to democracy. And Buddhism being the primary religion, but then also a small percentage being Rohingya Muslims. And so you have these conflicting values going on, and then you have the kind of what is truth kind of thing going on at the same time. It's just a perfect storm of just hellfire. Now people are getting shot in the street. It's wild. But I think that's a pretty good example of what he's talking about. We have no gauge for what's going on over there because we aren't in it. We don't understand their morality, and they don't understand ours truly, and they haven't organically developed the things that we've had so long to develop, that all the way going back to the Greeks.
Yeah.
With Plato and Socrates. It's no coincidence that we came out of that tradition. And then obviously Western Christianity was the biggest factor in that. But still, it's if those things aren't present, how are we ever going to communicate between cultures in an effective manner and understand each other like he's kind of talking about there?
Yeah, no, I agree. That's good. Did you have something, Steve?
I was just thinking about how there is a lot of barriers. I'm discovering that too. Talking to my friend in England about the lockdowns, and the government's obviously very different, and they have the 2-person outside rule. So they're waiting on they're not allowed to have more than 2 people together outside at a time, or you get fined. I'm just trying to discuss that, but we obviously have different rules, and we believe different things about what it means to have freedom and health, and be able to go do our thing. And they're just no, whatever the government says, I'll do it. And it's wow, this is tough. This is tough to navigate.
They seem to trust their government more than definitely more than we do. And I think that stems from the fact that historically they are subjects of their government. I don't know, David, you may know this. I think they're still considered subjects of the United Kingdom, aren't they?
The English?
Yeah.
Technically, although it's only in formality and not in legal, not in parliamentary law doesn't include that. It's just a formal,
right,
an informal declaration.
But from what I've talked with people, my British friends, it seems to be that's still almost an understated part of the DNA that we're subjects of the crown, and we're subjects of leadership and the lords and the vassals, and I say that because classism is huge over there, and they also have what's it called? It's not civil law. Where if a judge makes a ruling, it becomes a law. That's I forget what that's called, but that's.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
It slipped my mind today, but yeah. So if a judge, the high court, rules something, it automatically becomes a law. There's no voting. It's just it now is civil precedence, and you're oh.
Wow.
Which is kind of the way ours works, but it's not quite so set in stone as theirs.
Right.
With copyright law, kind of coming back to that again, we don't have an actual law that says what you are and aren't allowed to copy. We just kind of go based off of previous laws, but it's we still have to argue your point based off of previous rulings. The ruling could be slightly different, and you can kind of work your way around it. But in their system, it's no, this ruling is it. So it's there's a little wiggle room in ours.
Yeah. There's a little less judicial activism in America, a little less. Thankful for the Constitution on that.
I was watching mean, I agree with everything that's been said. But I was just watching CPAC yesterday, and I was really surprised at that particular movement, how many countries around the world that it's growing in. I mean, they talked about Australia, which wasn't much of a surprise. I mean, we've had good, the United States has had good relations with Australia. The one that surprised me was Japan. It's like, I mean, that was one of our foes in World War II, and then but there's such a strong conservative movement there, and it's like, you know, they're taking our ideologies, and then make them for themselves.
Right. Yeah.
And, it's really surprised me. I mean, and I get, you know, like in most of the Muslim countries, the stuff that doesn't happen too well or doesn't seem to. And I'm saying that it doesn't or does, but it just seems, you know, and well, I said this earlier today too. The more I study my field of counseling and know people, the more confused I get. Because everybody, you think something's going to happen one way, and it just goes totally right or totally left, however you want to look at it. It goes a different path than what you would expect.
Right.
I don't know what's wrong with that, but it just seems like when you try to think that, you know, it's going to work one way and only one way, then we get fooled by it.
Oh, every time.
I gotta pop off, guys, but this was great. I love talking to you. Sorry to just jump in there, but I gotta run. But y'all are awesome, and I hope to see you soon. Probably be a couple weeks, and I'll be able to come back for real.
All right, David. Take care, buddy.
See ya.
All right, you too. See y'all.
Bye. Yeah, so let's see, page 14. Yeah, I think there's a real, the way prominent cultures are going now with postmodernism is it continually breeds chaos. My truth, okay? Let's say my truth. It's just whatever I believe is true. I can change my mind. How does that lend to stability? How can I build on something that which I can change constantly? I'm not Emmett in the Lego movie. I can't just take not all the parts are equal and I can just reconstruct whatever it is and make something different. Like I'm given a certain thing.
That's what's so great about binding contracts or covenants. those are agreed to terms that you can't just change whenever you want.
2 + 2 is 4. Could you imagine? Can you imagine a world? Let's just take a child growing up who's 6 years old. We know how hard it is as middle-aged and almost middle-aged and slightly older than middle-aged. Middle-aged. How hard is it to know who you are even now? And you have all this experience of living life and getting to test out theories to see who you are and see what works. To know if you don't add the money in your bank account correctly, you're going to bounce a check. Math's not equitable, right? You can't just say, no, I thought I had $1,000 in there. Like, no, you had 100. So I thought I had 1,000. It doesn't work. So you get to test out these theories about who you are and what works and what flourishes and what causes suffering. That's the thing. What does it flourish or does it cause suffering? Those are our options. And so now imagine taking a 6-year-old child and say, listen, every 6-year-old child can be whatever gender they want to be. They can identify whatever species they want to be. Whatever they can imagine, they can become. Can you imagine if someone says there's an infinite amount of possibilities, nothing is objective, nothing is static, everything is fluid, go. What kind of life is that where you have to create everything for yourself and there's nothing that you experience that is structured or that has order? Everything's chaos. Nothing to hold on to. Well, what kind of psychological damage does that cause a child at that age to say, no, there are rules. My children, from the time that they're 10 now, and every time they've gained a little bit of consciousness, they have pushed the envelope. They have pushed against us. They have pushed to see where the boundaries go and move the boundaries back slightly. And you know what? When they hit the boundaries and they keep trying to attack that boundary, we're like, no. They relax and they get comfortable and they get happy because they know this is where the boundary is. There's order inside of here. Outside of that is chaos. Okay, this is the border for now. And they'll push the border out a little more, and they'll push it out a little more, and we'll push it out a little more. But only in small increments because they need to know that there's a foundation that they can rely on and that things are going to be a certain way and they can relax. Jordan Peterson says it like this. Most of the stuff that happens in our life is irrelevant, right? How many chairs are behind you? How many tables are behind you? How many lights are behind you? What's going on around you? How many cars are outside? Is a train going by? What's the weather? Most of this stuff, as you're sitting here talking to me, it's irrelevant. It's in the background. It's running. It's all running, but you don't pay attention to it, right? Now, if I take that away from you and I say everything is up to your perception, suddenly everything's relevant and you have to pay attention to everything, or you don't know what's going on. It's like someone drops you in the middle of a jungle you've never been to. What do? If I move to the right, I could die. Move to the left, I could die. Well, is this bug? Is this a poisonous bug? Is this berry poison? What? Everything is relevant. And you can't live in a hyper state like that of anxiety. We are built to let things go to the irrelevant and to the background so we can focus on what we want to do, on the things that are in front of us. Most stuff in life is irrelevant. When it all becomes relevant, then it causes psychological trauma and stress, and that's what postmodernism was doing.
And mass data consumption too.
Mass data consumption.
Suddenly, you have to keep.
Yeah, but if you constrict too much, then you're not loving, you're not understanding.
Right. That's why it's a balance.
Yeah.
So there is what I call. This is why I say imagination and reason. The balance of that. Not the moderation, the balance, right? That you have to have order and you have to have chaos. You have to have the known, you have to have the unknown, right? And you go into the unknown, you bring it back into the known. It's a dance and it's a journey. You can't if you constrict too much, it's dead and it's dry and it doesn't have imagination, it doesn't have life. If you go over into imagination, it's all death because there's nothing to hold on to and everything just falls apart. You have to have it in the middle. I think there's an argument to be made for God that every atom in the world has an optimal state, including us. There's an optimal state for everything that exists. And if there's an optimal state, then that means there's a balance between order and chaos. And that only comes if there's a designed universe. And a designed universe comes from a designer, and a designer has to have a mind, and a mind is God. So I think there's an argument made for, because there are optimal states of being, therefore God exists. And I think that's where we have to live. But you can't go too far. That's why I teach the fundamentals of thinking, so that no matter what piece of information hits me, I can dissect it and see if there's anything good in it or not. So I don't, left or right doesn't matter. When somebody hands me a piece of information, I go, let me see. Does it violate Aristotle's 3 laws of logic? Does it correspond with reality? Is it coherent? Does it violate any logical fallacies? If it passes all those tests, well, now let me see if it actually is applicable. Let me see what I can do with it. Is it a real fact? Can it be proven? What's my opinion on it? Then I wrestle with it. If it doesn't pass muster up to those first set of things, the first test that I have for it, don't have time for it. Swipe it away. That does not, because there's an overabundance of information, we can't parse it all out. So when a piece of information is handed to me, I run it through my filter and go, nope. Oh, here's something, it passed it. Now let me wrestle with it. Okay, all right, well, that's bad. No, I think this is good. That's bad. Oh, that actually was good. Bring it back, And then, if it's something I want to hold on to, even if it goes against a belief that I have, I will go, oh, take that belief out and stick the new belief in. Oh, it works so much better. I see things more clearly. Oh, that's what that means. Okay. And that's the process of how we go through life. I don't think we should look at both sides. I think we should look to discern truth. Because who said either both sides can be wrong. So how do we discern truth from either side? There's Unabashedly Resolute, the training that I have, it teaches. In 20 years I've been doing this. This is how I do it, and it has worked out tremendous for me. Now, can I still be wrong? Yes. You know why? Because I'm more gullible, as Peterson says, than I would like to think that I am. And I know this. I know this about myself. I'm more gullible, especially if it's conspiratorial. I like a good conspiracy.
In there too.
I like it, and especially if it's against the left. I love it. But I have a wonderful wife who helps pull me back over and is like, well, let's hold up a second there. And I'm already, even though I run through the filters, sometimes I will skip a step and go, hey, I like this. And then I'm like, oh, you know what? Let me look at that and backtrack it and go, it's probably not worth holding on to. So, but you don't have to you shouldn't feel guilty for a belief. The thing is, I'm doing this now. One, I'm trying not to let the opinions of others offend me. I'm trying to give them grace. And then I'm learning how to be unabashed in my opinion, having my own opinion. Because there's nothing illegal about having a wrong opinion. Right? I can have a bad philosophy. It's not illegal to have a wrong philosophy. I mean, this is going to be very controversial. But you can be a racist. It's not illegal to be a racist. It's bad, and you shouldn't be a racist, but there's nothing illegal about it. And what will happen is you will lose friends, you will lose people around you, you will cause suffering, your life will not flourish, and people will not want to follow you or listen to you because you actually bring suffering, not flourishing. If you bring forgiveness and you speak about hope, you will attract people to you because people want to flourish. It's a game that they can play. They know if they're around you, they're going to be encouraged. They're going to want to play that game over and over and over again, and you guys are going to flourish together. And the racists and the white supremacists are going to fall away because they breed hate, and they breed disdain, and they breed suffering. And so the natural, letting nature take over, they will weed themselves out unless they have a lever of power. Think of this. Every great atrocity in humankind, 99% of them have come at the hands of someone at a lever of power of government. And they've used that to promote their ideology. From the Old Testament all the way up. Even King David did some atrocities, right? At a lever of power. Uzziah, wasn't it? Or Uriah? Uriah? Yeah. Put him on the front and then pull back. Because he had the lever of power, right? The 9 scariest words in the English language. I'm from the government, and I'm here to help. I believe that. And it's interesting that people want to give the government more power when the greatest atrocities of humankind have all come from governments, not from individuals. I say, empower the individuals, take more power from the governments, and you can stop an individual. You can't stop a government. There's no recourse once the government has the authoritarian power. There's this saying that you can vote a socialist in, but you have to shoot your way out. I think that's kind of where this leads to. So
that's what really worries me about our country right now. It's all the stuff that's going on.
But Solzhenitsyn ends this book with a really, and I won't spoil it here because this is on the podcast. But he ends this by basically saying something that Jordan Peterson says as well. Tell the truth, at least don't lie. And if there are enough people telling the truth and not lying, tyranny can never win. It's when you refuse to speak the truth, that's when tyranny can have its day. Even Sauron ruled all of Middle Earth, right? There were two little hobbits running around. Could not find them. So I'd say take courage. There are two little hobbits running around right now. And because evil is not truth, right? It's not truth. Truth is solid, evil is not. Evil is the absence of truth. Like evil is the absence of good, right? A lie is the absence of truth. If you're promoting evil, then your aim is off. So you can't hit your mark. Even if you know what your mark is, you can't hit it. So invariably, evil always creates an empire that has a devastating flaw. And that once that flaw is hit, the whole thing comes down. Death Star. Photon torpedo took down the Death Star. One ring destroyed Sauron. Voldemort, killing Harry Potter, killed himself. The thing he wanted, I want to kill Harry Potter. And he kills him and he winds up, that was the last Horcrux he didn't mean to make, didn't know it was a Horcrux. And then that led to his own demise. Evil's aim is always off because it can't aim at truth. It's aiming at something other than truth. So its aim is always off. Its goals will always fail because it has horrible aim. It's misguided. If you tell the truth, that will sustain you. Do all you can to stand. And if that's all you can do, then just stand. So that is where I would say, be of good cheer. Things may get bad, but they can't stay bad. Because evil will burn itself out. Because it always gets what it wants. But it's never what it thought it was going to get. And it creates the monster. If you watch the movie Serenity, have you ever seen that? The Firefly series, they create the monsters that kill them. It was their own monsters that killed them. And you go, Frankenstein. He created the monster that killed him. And you go, that's because evil's always off. It's always misguided. Its aim is always poor. If your aim is true, and for me, and I would challenge anyone in the world to show me a better political aim than a Declaration of Independence. There's not been a better political aim ever written on a sheet of paper or parchment than all men are created equal, endowed with inalienable rights given to them by their Creator. There's no better political aim. So America simply needs to recalibrate their aim on individualism as opposed to collectivism, and the ship will right in about 3 or 4 years. Everything would be flourishing again. But when you point to collectivism, then what he's saying is, remember what Solzhenitsyn says, when you have collective things, you put a virus in and it touches everything immediately because it's all the same. And if every collective is the same and we all believe the same things, you drop a virus into that, it kills the whole thing. But if you have a bunch of individuals up and you send a virus in, well, some individuals are asymptomatic. Some individuals have antibodies. Some individuals die. Some individuals, because they're all unique and they're all different. And if you notice, this is just an observation. I don't know if I'm right or not. This is an observation from conservatives. Rarely look unified. They rarely look like they're together. Because they're not. Because they're individuals. Because everybody has their own platform and their own understanding of conservatism. Right? Go to the left. Do they look unified? Actually, I think the left does look unified. They're lockstep. If you step out of line, if you're a politician and you step out of line from the left, from the talking points and the ideology, you're gone. I don't know how many senators I've seen say something, and then there are people around them who go, I want that person to resign. You're like, wait, they spoke their mind. They're out of step with us.
It's happening. I see that a lot with the Republicans right now. The ones that aren't towing the Trumpist line right now, they're getting censured by their state Republican parties and stuff
Right.
like that. We gotta be this, and they're that. And it's not allowing a chance for the individuals to work together to come up with what is probably going to be a better solution for all in between.
That's mislabeling Trumpism. It's not Trumpism, it's conservatism. Trump was one in office that got the job done.
That's awesome. We can disagree. Andrew Clavin says politics is the opposite of thinking because it demands you pick a side. Mm-hmm. And I kind of refuse to pick a side, especially even in religion. I refuse to pick a denomination.
Just heard that.
I don't care what C.S. Lewis says about you have to choose a room. Like I'll stay in the hallway. I'm in the house. I'm just going to stay in I'll stay in the hallway.
Well, and I had this thought, I think it was just yesterday, about denominations, but it could probably go for everything because you're outside of that box or that system, you are able to observe from other, and you're not married. I've had arguments with people, just arguments, not like fights, but arguments with people, and they are so magnetically anchored to that system of arguments, like theological boxes, that's all they can pull from. And so when I might agree with him on some things and then agree with another person in the same argument. He said, well, you can't agree with both of us. I said, yeah, I can. Because I'm not married to those. Mm. So you are allowed to float around. Not ethereal, but...
Carl Jung says, ideas have you more than you have ideas. So if you believe in ideology, and this is what happens, this is where you get your alt-right, this is where you get the alt-left, this is where you get... things like Trumpism, you get never Trumpers, you get all that, is because there's an ideology. There's a belief system. And if you hold this belief system, you basically have to throw out everything that disagrees with your belief system. You can't accept it. You have to reject it, whether it's good or not. You have to reject it. And so, because I grew up in the United Pentecostal Church, I had to reject many good ideas because it didn't fit with my ideology, and I had to make the world fit into my frame. And so I rejected people, I rejected jobs, I rejected everything to make sure that my worldview worked. And I had to get rid of stuff, the watchful dragons. I had to have that watchful dragon up there, and he annihilated everything that wasn't United Pentecostal. But guess what? Inside the United Pentecostal, there was also another frame of true United Pentecostal, of true Christians. And inside that, there was the holiest of holies, and you went down. And going from legalism and United Pentecostal Church and going into Presbyterian and even being an Anglican and being in all these religions, being a militant atheist and going into Buddhism and Hinduism and all these things, I've realized that the core foundations of Christianity offer the most truth. They offer the greatest foundation to build upon. There are still good things in some of these other religions where they've hit it. They've hit the mark in some of these things. I can borrow from that because if Christ is the only truth that exists, just because they're not saying the name Aslan doesn't mean it's not Aslan's. Just because they're saying that, he's like, well, I did all these things for Tash. You're like, no. Tash doesn't have these qualities. Some of the qualities that Buddha has, they don't belong to Buddha because they're Christ's. Even though Buddha is saying that there's still a truth of Christ because the only truth that exists, he says, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. So when someone speaks truth, they are speaking Christ even though they don't say Christ. And I go, okay, that's good. I can keep that. Tony Robbins says something good. I can keep that, Even if Ravi Zacharias says something good, that's a good thought. I can hold on to those things. And I don't have to go, I'm sorry, this person's outside of my denomination. I can't listen to what they have to say. Even though it's going to help me and it's beneficial and it's good. Nope, sorry.
Because you said it's what they're pointing at.
Yes. I look at what people are pointing at, not at who they are. What are you pointing at? If I look and see somebody, I can see an atheist point at Christ and go, yeah, I'll hold on to that because you're pointing at Christ. I see it. Like, that's the same aim Lewis had right there. Let me bring that over and use a reference to that, you know. And life gets easier at that point because I'm not so worried about building the wall so high that nothing gets in. Because I have the ability to disseminate truth from information coming in. And it's so much, some bad stuff gets in. Yeah, I say wrong things and I do wrong things. But overall, I'm solid on where I'm solid. And I know how to ask better questions. So when information comes, I ask a better question. And I get to the answers quicker. Because I know what questions to ask. So, Solzhenitsyn, man. Definitely gets you thinking. And I think we've all can say that the Thomas P. Whitney version is by far the best.
I don't know what version this is, but it's the one that's on the Solzhenitsyncenter.org website.
Maybe they think that's the best
Or maybe they do. They're wrong.
Some of what your edition has I like. Some of what I've read in his I like better. But it varies from sense.
There you go, from NIV, King James to NLT. All right, well, that's going to be all. We've actually gone over a little bit tonight, but thank you guys for coming out. This has been a lot of fun. Further up.
Further in.